Well, hello, Endow ladies. Simone here, Director of Program Growth, and I am joined today by Father Dwight Longenecker, who is the pastor of Our Lady of the Rosary Parish in Greenville, South Carolina. Right, Father? Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And Father, if you don't know of him already, has an interesting story and is actually a convert from the Anglican Communion. So I'm so excited to talk to Father today, especially because Lent is next week. And so I wanted to get into the idea of the feminine genius, the female saints, the feisty female saints, and spiritual warfare. So I think that I agree with you, Father. And first of all, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. That we don't necessarily talk about warfare so much in the church. So I'd love to pick your brain about that, especially in the context of the feminine genius. And if you want to, love to hear a little bit more about your story, if you're willing to share it.
Sure. Do you want to ask about the theme of being the church militant, as we call it?
Well, I mean, I think we're, Lent is upon us, and I'd like to kind of get our spiritual armor up. So.
Right, and I think this is one of the things neglected in the modern church, where it tends to be a little bit kind of soft and sentimental a lot of times, and I think we're sometimes rightfully worried about a militant aspect to our faith, because maybe we think of Muslim terrorists or jihadis or something, or the Crusades, which wasn't always the best thing about the Catholic tradition, and that's just not what we're talking about. We're not talking about, armed militias and so forth. We're talking about spiritual warfare. And this theme of spiritual warfare, of course, goes right back through to the New Testament and also to the people of God in the Old Testament, who were the theme of a military theme echoes through the Psalms. That great psalm, "He teaches my hands to war and my fingers to battle," or whatever that psalm is, on through to the New Testament, where Jesus does warfare with Satan, and St. Paul in Ephesians says, put on the whole armor of God, and so forth. And this military or metaphor of being engaged in a battle also echoes right down through all of the saints. You read the saints, you'll find a warrior. Even, we could talk about the women saints, even the female saints as well, who sometimes, even Saint Therese of Lisieux is one of my favorites, who's the little flower, and she's this sweet French girl who goes into the convent and it makes sort of embroidered vestments and so forth. But she's also says, sanctity must be won at the point of a sword. She's got this militant aspect to her.
Right. Well, it's right from the beginning in Genesis, right? I will put enmity between you and the evil one. So I think, for me at least, maybe it's my Middle Eastern roots, who knows? But I've always had this sense of warfare because my background is from persecuted countries. So I think it's always been very clear in my mind that there's a battle going on. But I think also, more, as you mentioned, more fundamentally, spiritually speaking, it's been a consolation too, because something's not right. Like something's off in our lives, and no matter how much we can have our best efforts at it, there's a strong resistance, whether the resistance is original sin or the devil or whatever it is. But there's something that I'm fighting against, and I think knowing that there's a whole spiritual reality, a spiritual plane of warfare going on, is a great consolation to me that I'm not crazy. that I am fighting something.
It is. I think that one has to be cautious as well, though, and say, first of all, the battle is with evil and with Satan, and also with myself and self-discipline, not finding other people to blame. And sometimes this militant aspect can turn into blaming other people, and then projecting all of the evil onto them and saying they're the problem.
Made me do it. That's my own ego.
That's not what it's about. It's about engaging with Satan and engaging with ourselves and our worst side. To be able to make progress. One of the books I've written is called Praying the Rosary for Spiritual Warfare. And in that book, I make the point also of a true understanding of evil. Evil is actually always understood in the Christian tradition. This goes back to St. Augustine as being the absence of good, or the distortion and destruction of good. Now, this is very important, because evil is not actually something positive on its own. Don't misunderstand me. I believe in the devil, and I believe the effects of evil are real in the world. But when you study evil, everything that's evil is a lie. Everything that's evil is a distortion of what's good and the destruction of what's good, or the absence of what's good.
Right. It's not a
It's
positive
nothing,
reality. Right.
it's nothing positive in itself.
Yeah.
So therefore, the best way to counter it is not really actually to try to attack it head on very often, because you're attacking something which doesn't exist. You're attacking a lie, and a lie is a lie. How do you counter a lie? You counter a lie by telling the truth.
Truth.
Okay.
Right.
And likewise, all of our battles against evil are ways to operate positively in the world for all the stuff that's good. So in my book, Praying Rosary for Spiritual Warfare, I gave people the good things to pray for, which counter the bad things, as lighting a candle counters the dark.
Oh, I love that. That is so helpful. And definitely I'm in that line of feeling like the daily rosary, or the rosary, is a spiritual weapon. I'm a big Padre Pio fan. And I feel like, Father, no matter what happens in my day, and, I always start my day offering it to God, begging for his help, help me to follow your will so I can bring you glory and enjoy my life, But at the end of the day, if I've prayed a rosary, I at least feel like I can concretely say that a proactive step was made to help the spiritual battle, whether
Sure.
it's my own or the universe in some way. So I think there's a lot of power to the rosary, a lot of power to Mary, which I think it's kind of beautiful pointing out that, like, I think Christians, we tend to want to kind of attack the thing, which, as you mentioned, evil is a non-reality. But instead of making a positive proposal for the true, the good, and the beautiful, is a much more effective, although sometimes I feel like it's seen as a weaker way than,
Well, in the end, what really defeats evil is our ordinary Christians who are living a radiant, spirit-filled, joyful life. That is what defeats evil and conquers evil most effectively. The prayers and so forth and the other aspects of battle, I don't want to deny them, but still in my life, the people who've made the biggest impression on me are the ones who really lived out their faith in a positive, joyful way. And that's the other thing about spiritual warfare. Sometimes Christians a little bit sour and angry. If the battle is sour and angry, it's, I go to March for Life in Washington most years when I can. And what's the great thing about that is that there we're fighting against the evil of abortion, but it's a very, tens of thousands of young people, mostly. It's joyful, it's happy, people singing, and it's a real pro-life march. It's not just an anti-abortion march.
Oh, I love that distinction. That's a huge, when I lived in DC, everybody would go the Dubliner after the March for Life. And it was like about babies and beer and joy and hopefully bringing a good witness. So if I could just steer us a little bit, coming from the Anglican tradition, what's life like now, and how long have you been a Catholic and a Catholic priest? And you're a married priest. So I'm from the Eastern Catholic tradition. So I have both celibate and married priests, in my life. But I just wanted to have a little bit of that conversation with you, if you don't mind.
Well, I was in the Anglican Church in England, the Church of England, for, I guess, about 15 years. Before that, I was brought up as an evangelical Christian. So I understand, the Protestant evangelical tradition, as that's the way I was brought up. But then I went to England to study, became an Anglican priest before coming into the Catholic Church. We were then in the Catholic Church for 10 years I was a layman, and our family was growing at that point. And then in 2006, we moved back to the States from England, and when I was ordained as a Catholic priest. And you're talking about being a married Catholic priest. This is done under something called the pastoral provision, a special provision for former Anglicans who are married, who are already ordained, to come into the Catholic Church and become Catholic priests. So that accounts for the wedding ring.
The wedding ring. Yes, exactly. Oh, that's great. And in terms of, I guess, in related to our conversation about spiritual warfare, do you feel like in the Catholic world now that this reality is something less or more ignored?
Well, I think my own opinion is that in America, and certainly in Europe, there are, I'm afraid, two Catholic churches. And there is a whole sort of Catholic Church which follows the Orthodox historic, I call it the historic faith, faithful to the magisterium and to Scripture, and to the moral teachings of the church. And then there's this other church, which in fact controls most of the establishment in the Latin church. They have the big universities and the publishing houses and the colleges and some of the religious
Right.
orders and so forth, but they're secularized. And they don't like to admit it, but the Catholic faith they follow is on a trajectory which is further and further from the historic Catholic faith. And so that's those sort of Catholics, either spiritual warfare isn't on their agenda, or they would tend to say, oh yes, well, that's that sort of radical sort of Catholicism we don't know much about. But in
Right.
fact, on the other Catholic Church, which is full of converts and full of really faithful Catholics to the historic faith, they have their own colleges and publishing houses. They have blogs, they have websites, they have TV stations. They run men's conferences and women's conferences. That's where all the action actually is.
Yes.
And they're very keen on spiritual warfare, and they know that it's a battle. So in the Catholic Church, it's spiritual warfare on the up or the down. Choose your Catholic. But
Right.
I think certainly the circles that I move in, spiritual warfare is very much a strong, a very hot topic.
Right, right. Saying guardian angel prayers and Saint Michael. And I like that website, CatholicWarriors.com. They have some good spiritual warfare prayers on there. And
Right.
I don't want to sound over spiritualizing or superstitious here, but I remember when I first went to study theology, I felt spiritually attacked. And I didn't have that concept necessarily in my mind, but it felt like there were these like supernatural distractions coming up. And I thought, is this what people are talking about when they're talking about spiritual warfare? Because every time I sit down to read my homework and for graduate school, like there would be this insane distraction. So anyway, so for Endow women who, we're in our Endow groups and we're studying St. Teresa of Avila or John Paul II's writings on the feminine genius. This is like something we value is intellectual formation and in the context of an intentional community, which I think is really where the Christian thing really emerges in the context of a real community based on Christ. And like, at least for nerds like me, accessing this like rich intellectual tradition. Can you give us some tips or recommendations or just things that you'd like to equip us with before we enter into the season of Lent?
Well, I think, well, I have several books out on my website. There's an online course which I'll be teaching during Lent on spiritual warfare, and the various books that I've written on praying the Rosary for spiritual warfare and Immortal Combat, which came out last year, which has touched a lot of people. But also, I think simply immersing ourselves more and more in the liturgy of the Church during Lent and paying attention to what's happening. And I am always encouraging people to actually take seriously the Catholic tradition of fasting and asceticism.
Yeah.
This is part of spiritual warfare, and it's always been part of our Catholic tradition, but it's been in this soft and luxurious age, it's been quietly sort of dismissed or minimalized.
Yeah.
And Lent is a time to really take that seriously. Well, I mean, our society's kind of crazy. We don't mind getting in the car and driving to the gym and wearing some ridiculous clothes and working out on a treadmill with other sweaty people, which is, to my mind, quite a humiliating thing to do.
I agree. This is why I do not engage in unessential exercise. Continue, Father.
Yeah, you know what I mean. We diet and we go on these extreme diets where we eat sort of nothing but kale all week long, and then
Torture ourselves with kale
we
chips.
torture ourselves in all these other ways. But when someone says, have you thought about fasting to really sharpen your spiritual life? Oh no, we don't do that sort of thing. And that's extreme. That's extremist.
That's extremism. I don't want to fall into dangerous moralism. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Well, my mother is Greek Orthodox. I mean, she's Catholic now, but raised Greek Orthodox and spiritually fed a lot by Coptic Orthodoxy, which they're always fasting. And she goes,
"Oh, they have, yes, they're very keen on their fasts, aren't they? Yes, but we could learn a bit from our Eastern brothers."
Exactly. She's always making fun of me and my sister, like, "Oh, you Westerners, you don't know how to fast,
Right, and they're right about that.
They're right about that. So, okay, so you mentioned Saint Therese, the little flower, and other. Can we spend a few minutes? I know we don't have all day, and I'm so glad that you can give us this little jump start before we head into our Lenten season, but who are your favorite female saints? Talk to me about feisty feminism. How are we supposed to understand these categories? Because there's a lot of different opinions, at least on the female end of things, about is it right or wrong to be a Catholic feminist? Should we even use that word? John Paul II calls for a new feminism. So I would love to hear your thoughts about all of that.
Well, my thoughts about it are that I think on one dimension, if feminism is arguing for fair pay and for respect of women and all this, yeah, it's fine. But I mean, decent people were supposed to do that anyway.
Right.
And the old tradition of courtesy was actually that men were meant to treat women like ladies, and meant, all the thing about opening the door for them, and
Yeah.
treating them with honor and respect. And feminism has kind of stood that on its head and said, "Oh no, that's patronizing and that's bad for women." I never really got that myself, so I have a lot of criticisms of feminism, especially if it's trying to tell women that they're supposed to be more like men. Women
Yeah.
are better than men. Why should you try to be like us? You
Yeah,
know,
that's
I don't,
exactly right.
I don't
The
get.
masculine genius is the whole other thing. We
Yeah.
don't.
But to praise, therefore, a feminism that praises femininity and praises the feminine genius is remarkable and is wonderful. One of the things that I think you talked about my favorite female saints. Well, Therese of Lisieux is right up there, and I think the second book I wrote was called Saint Benedict and Saint Therese: The Little Rule and the Little Way, combining the spirituality and lives of Saint Benedict with Saint Therese.
Oh, fascinating, Father.
Yeah, so that's one. But the other Thereses as well: Teresa of Avila, feisty female, and Teresa Benedict of the Cross, Saint Elizabeth Stein, and Teresa of Calcutta. I actually had the privilege of meeting Saint Teresa of Calcutta.
No
When I was
way.
in India, I actually met her for a few minutes, which was neat.
What
And
was
I
that
think,
like? What was that like before
well, yeah, it's not. I mean, I didn't go, and it wasn't a big meeting, but I went with a friend as a tourist to India, and we went to Calcutta, and we were both Anglican priests at the time, so we took
Wow,
a collection from Mother Teresa's work, and
beautiful.
we went to her home, the mother house in Calcutta, and I'll never forget going down this side alley and a little door there, and they had one of those little sliding things. It said "Mother is in" or "Mother is out." And it said "Mother is in." Oh, she's here. So we went through the door, and the little receptionist nun said, "Would you like to meet Mother?" "Yeah, well, yes, please." So we waited for about 15 minutes, and she came out from another meeting and shook our hands. And I can remember her saying, "Have you come to give your life in service to God's holy poor?" And we said, "Well, we brought you a check."
We do what Westerners do. We just bring checks.
Yeah, take a check, okay? And
Yeah.
no, but
I
she
love
then assigned us to another sister who took us around to visit the Home of the Dying and have a tour of the whole thing. So it was wonderful. And I think Mother Teresa, Therese of Lisieux, all the things that are remarkable about women saints, to my mind, is um, and this would apply for Catherine of Siena as well, and any that I can think of, is that they have this independence of spirit where they're just themselves who God created them to be. And that's what a saint really is. A saint is a person, man or woman, who has reached their full potential.
Wow.
And women in our society especially are under so much pressure to be someone other than they really are. They're supposed to be the perfect mother, the perfect bride, the perfect lover, the perfect secretary, the perfect executive, the perfect lawyer, the perfect high-powered woman. They have all these false models being thrown at them. And I think part of the feminine psychology is actually to be giving and to be adaptable and to try to fit in and with other people's expectations. This is one of the actual gifts that women have. But
Right.
if that's not used in the right way, it becomes a great burden for them. And I feel really sorry, therefore, for a lot of modern women who feel that they've got to be, everything. They've got to hold down a high-powered job, not dress in a sexy way at work, and yet they're supposed to be sexy anyway. And then they're supposed to come home and be the wonderful mother and have a fresh batch of cookies ready for everybody. It's how do you do it? I know women are good at multitasking, but when in the confessional, I hear a lot of women, really pouring their hearts out at the stress they're
Pressure,
under
stress
because of this.
level.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that was also personally encouraging, and I know for those listening as well, it will be and is. But I totally agree, and I think that it's also. I feel like I'm picking on the West right now, but a little bit. It's also a very Western pressure. I mean, I remember distinctly, being raised in an immigrant family that, I was in like 2 activities in school, and that was enough, and that was busy. And
Yeah.
like everybody else was like in 15 different activities. And I remember my mother just saying, I'm not going to spend our lives just driving you around from 1,000 activities. So you have this like resume that you have to build. I mean, this is like ridiculous. Like,
Stay
and
home and let's cook supper.
let's just
Yeah.
like have time with grandma. And, my grandmother lived with us
I'll
for,
tell you something else, which is
yeah.
an impact. I wrote an article some time ago for Imaginative Conservative website, and it was called something like Barbie and Marilyn or something. And this was an analysis of the development of the Barbie doll. Okay, now this is maybe
Okay.
a little bit off track, but this
No,
is not.
I'm following you. Yeah.
In the late 50s, they developed the Barbie doll. Now, this is the same time as Marilyn Monroe was being popular and so forth. And
Ah,
I was saying that after the Second World War, the image of woman and mother shifted from being a mother and a wife to being, excuse the language, but being a sex kitten, basically, being a Marilyn Monroe.
wow.
And so the toy that comes out, therefore, is this unreal, buxom, thin fashion model,
Right.
sexy babe, Barbie
Exactly.
doll. And
Exactly.
they give the girls this thing to play with. Has it ever struck you how strange it was that before this, little girls were given baby dolls to play with?
Oh, wow.
You
Ouch.
see? And
Ouch.
and so when you're given a baby doll to play with, you start playing mommy,
No.
right? But if
Hiding
you're given a
behind
Barbie doll to play with, your role model now has become this vain, weird, plastic.
your thing. And that's like a cultural shift. I mean, literally from the toys that you're giving. I mean, the
Right.
formation having from the I hadn't even thought about that. That's incredible. I'll have to link that article to this episode because I'm sure
Yeah,
there
you ought to link it. It's an imaginative conservative. I can give you the link if you want, but I'm sort of working on a play about Marilyn Monroe, and I began to do the research, and the connections were made. And I thought, wow, the Barbie doll is weird, and with that as well as Ken, her boyfriend, so-called boyfriend. But somebody else has commented on this cultural phenomenon and say, is Ken really masculine? Um,
right.
no, Ken's kind of like the gay best friend that people have. It's Ken's not really.
He's not really the height of the masculine genius, you would say.
I hope I'm not getting off track, but I think
No,
these
no,
things have to do with women's
pressure.
imagery and
Yeah,
the
it's by
female.
osmosis. It's by osmosis because I would say that even growing up in a very countercultural home, if you will,
Yeah,
that it just doesn't matter. The culture out there is too strong. I mean, it's down to the toys we're playing with, and by osmosis, taking in these pressures and
yeah.
the lack of leisure and the lack of family time. And so I don't know.
And the wonderful thing about female saints, and this applies to all of our listeners as well, is to remember that they were able. They had I mean, they would have had pressures in their own culture, but they had the inner grace and inner strength to be who God created them to be.
Yeah.
To be strong, smart, hardworking, funny, feisty women. And this is why the female saints are so important, both for the whole church, for women and men.
For women in, yeah, I'm thinking as you're speaking, I'm thinking about a couple things. One, I was watching a documentary on Hollywood and whatnot, and when Grace Kelly got married and left to be queen, wife, mother, etc., and Nako, Marilyn Monroe wrote her letter and said, "Congratulations on getting out of this business and having a family of your own." I think that's so interesting. That
She wrote that to
she
whom?
wrote that to Grace Kelly and said,
Right. Yes.
"Congratulations for getting out of this hellhole, if you will, and having a real life with a family." That really struck me. a letter from Marilyn Monroe. The other thing, sorry to like flip flop a little bit, is when I love what Edith Stein says about women can only, I mean, I'm paraphrasing her, but women can only be like cultural game changers in the workforce or whatever, if they're deeply rooted in Christ. So when you were talking earlier about that independent spirit, you can only really have that, or be feisty, if you will, if you're so deeply rooted your identity in Christ. Then you have that freedom to just be yourself, as you said. And
Yes.
I think that's where that's to me, the feminine genius next phase of the church, is that we've got to get deeply rooted in Christ as women. Otherwise we can't really become saints. I mean, this seems like obvious as I'm saying it out loud, but like we're all busy looking toward each other, comparing, social media, you know, all these pressures, you know, and it doesn't have to be this way. It can end now.
Was it actually Teresa of Avila who said something like, be who God, no, Catherine of Siena is quoted saying, be who God created you to be, and you will set the world on fire.
Exactly.
Yeah, and this applies for women, of course, as well as men. And that's the great gift of becoming a saint, is that one is given the freedom and the liberty to be whom God created us to be. And what a gift that is. The other wonderful thing about this is that God uses these female saints very often to correct the age that they're living in.
I love that. I love that. Say more about that, Father, so we can embrace our feminine genius. This is what Endow is working on. It's the cultivation, right? It's a cultivation. Yeah. I mean, gosh, the world is so undignified. There are women that are just discovering that they have dignity at all. Like, I have dignity and value apart from wealth, pleasure, power, honor, looks, all that stuff. Once you get there and you say, oh, I've got this dignity, and I not only have this dignity, but there's this genius of women, and then I got to start cultivating that. I just love that you said that women are like the correctors. Can you speak more to that? I would love to hear you talk about that.
Yeah. So for instance, and I think G.K. Chesterton said that God uses the saints, he corrects every age by a saint who's as much unlike that age as possible. And one of my favorite examples, again, is Therese.
Is that from Orthodoxy? Is that
I don't remember.
You remember? Yeah.
It's a G.K. Chesterton quote. It's in the beginning of my book on Benedict and Therese. I quoted it.
Nice.
And one of my favorite examples, of course, again, is my favorite Therese of Lisieux, who she happens to be a contemporary of the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Mm-hmm. Now, Nietzsche is all about, if you know Nietzsche is all about, you know, the death of God and the Superman, the Übermensch, the will to power, and this great master race that's going to emerge, and we shall stride ahead in this dignity of our true humanity and all this garbage. And Therese goes, I'm just a little girl. You know?
And she's amazing.
Now, you're going to love this. Do you know that there is a churchy urban legend that Therese and Nietzsche stayed in the same hotel in Paris?
I have heard this, but I have not gotten the details on this. But if that's true, talk about the contrast.
The thing is, I think they not only stayed in the same hotel, but they may have been there at the same time.
Oh my God.
And furthermore, in this hotel is where Therese first rode in an elevator, because elevators were just being invented then. This is like 1887, something like that. And so I've got this idea for a stage play in which Nietzsche and Therese are trapped in the same elevator.
You've got to write it. Are you?
They have this conversation, you know, and he's going on about the Übermensch, and she goes, I don't speak German, you know, and talking about her little way, because she, this is God's great joke. You see, here's Western philosophy going on in this atheism and this over self-dramatizing themselves and all the rest of it. And God says, well, here, I have an answer for you. It's a little French girl. And she's, you know, this little, anyway.
She's the patroness of missionaries. She was dead at 24 and a cloistered nun. And she's unforgettable and just so popular. I mean, she's all over the world, Therese.
She's all over the world. And furthermore, when it comes to bestsellers, her book has outsold Nietzsche's book by millions.
I mean,
okay, millions and millions of people have read The Story of a Soul, and who's actually read Nietzsche? Not many. Okay. And Teresa of Calcutta also is a great corrector. There she is in the midst of the rise of modern feminism and women's ordination. Women should be more powerful in the church and blah, blah, blah. And there she is standing on the platform next to Pope John Paul II, telling him off.
What do you mean? Tell me that story. I don't know it.
Yeah, well, didn't you ever see those videos? Sometimes she would go to talk to him and she would almost take him by the lapel and say, now you listen to me.
I just love her so much. You hear this with her so much. She just has this certainty, this authority to her.
Yeah, she did. And he would listen to her. And she would give him a bit like Catherine of Siena telling the Pope what ho. She would also, have real straight talks with John Paul.
So tell me, I'm thinking of Catherine of Siena, of course, the wonderful corrector. What about the feminine genius do you think allows for that capacity? I mean,
Oh, come on. What are you talking about? Every husband will tell you about the feminine genius that's able to shake their fist and his finger in their husband's face and say, you listen to me.
Oh my gosh, you're so funny. Chesterton, I think, says this. I think this is maybe it's an everlasting man. I don't know. But who can remember where Chesterton is? He's everywhere. But, a woman, there's no greater advocate for, a woman is no greater advocate for her husband than in public. And then she, but as soon as there's closed doors, there's no greater corrector of her husband than a wife. And I love that. I love that. She will defend.
This is actually a gift of that women have. Of course, when it goes bad, they turn into a nag. Which is not good, but it's a genuine gift of correcting and putting things right and holding their husband and their children to a higher standard.
Yeah, good.
For instance, I'll share with you another thing from pastoral experience. The number of men, for instance, who I've spoken to who may have a pornography problem, and of course they're terrified that their wives should find out,
right.
And sometimes the wives do. And it's the wives who almost take their husbands by the ear and say, come on, we're going to go and talk to Father. You need to get yourself straightened out here.
We're going to fix this.
Okay. Yeah. And there's that sense of modesty and decent behavior in areas of sexuality, which women have naturally, which helps to correct men's beastliness, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's so good. I hadn't even thought about that, but I think that's so, so true. Well, gosh, this was such a fun conversation, Father. And
thanks for inviting me.
I am so grateful. And I'll link up all your stuff so that, but I have to say, your website is so impressive. I mean, you've got fairy tale stuff and Shakespeare and just like all these, and I'm a former theater actress or current or repressed or whatever you want to call it. And I love your website because I could spend all day on it with all the things you have there. So I think,
Yeah, I spend a lot of time on it because it's I like writing and I like, I was a speech and English major myself. So I like the communicating stuff and acting. And so talking about literature and film and drama and all that, as well as the faith is something you find on my blog. And also a lot of the Catholic media stuff out there is really extreme right now. And I try to keep a sensible balance. And there's some people say, I always come to you for a bit of balance and common sense, Father. So I hope I've got that too.
Yes, I think so. I think you do. I love your stuff. And I especially appreciate the culture, history, theater, the artistic stuff, because I think we could grow a lot as a church with cultural things. So that, I think that's a huge, huge help. But, very, very grateful for that. I guess I have to ask you, before I say goodbye, I have to ask you, are you a Newman fan? Am I putting you in a box as stereotypical because you were an Anglican and, John Henry Newman and...
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, him and Our Lady of Walsingham and all that good English stuff.
Good English stuff, yeah. So, well, that's great. He's someone I really want to tackle intellectually. I wish we had an Endow study on. Maybe we will one day. Maybe we'll get a donor to fund a Newman study, because I think that would be fantastic. Great saint. So, well, thank you so much, Father, and pray for us. We're praying for you, Endow women. We always have priest cards in all of our Endow studies in our books, so that we always remember to intercede, like Saint Therese, for all of our priests. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the invitation.